The Human Optimization Podcast is proudly brought to you by Vicon Supplements, where quality meets sustainability. Vicon's all-natural supplements are handcrafted and sustainably produced in Canada, bringing you products that nourish both your well-being and our planet. Visit viconsupplements.com today and be a part of a greener, healthier future.
Are you ready to embark on a journey to the best version of you? Join me, Lisa Pitel-Killah, as I dive deep into the world of hair tissue mineral analysis and functional medicine with fellow experts, and guide you on the path of unlocking your full potential. As a multi-time kettlebell sport world champion, I'm on a mission to reach high-performance professionals from around the world to help you minimize tiring symptoms, maximize health, and gain unstoppable energy. This is the Human Optimization Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of the Human Optimization Podcast. I am your host, Lisa Pitel-Killah, and I've got Jeffrey Williams here with me today. Let me tell you a little bit about Jeffrey. With a passion spanning over 2 decades, Jeffrey is a transformation artist deeply immersed in unraveling the human body's potential. Through intensive study of traditional and modern wellness systems worldwide, he has become a guide for diverse individuals employing a spectrum of high-impact teachings in bodywork, sound, breath, values, and movement. Jeff's coaching and training programs, such as the Autonomic Nervous System Reset, empower other practitioners and individuals alike to seize control of their health journey, fostering vitality and a life lived to its fullest potential. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Well, I'm happy you are here. I think there are so many amazing things that we can talk about with all of the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, where do we start?
Right? And so I always like to start with we all have a story of why we're here, why we're doing this work. Give us a little background on you. Tell us how you got here.
I think that for me, I grew up really fortunate to have an incredible family. We grew our own food a lot. We had this home scale, organic little farm, and spent a lot of time in nature, backpacking, camping, kind of weekend warrior style. And also had some really interesting encounters with just education in general, where I really felt like, is this it? This is what we're learning? And even I remember from a very young age feeling like, there's gotta be more than this. There's gotta be something better. It just feels like we're all kind of being worked into cogs of a machine. And so from very early on, I just began to look outside of the box and try to find what other teachings, what other things were out there, and really had nature was kind of the biggest playground and teacher, but also had a teacher in high school that kind of blew my mind wide open. And he just introduced me to some philosophy that really just started to put those big questions in my head. And really what led me into the health and wellness world was this particular experience I had as a high school kid and early college. I experimented with plant medicines like psychedelics. And when I had an experience when I was 19, as I had been growing my own mushrooms, and I brought some home to my little brother over spring break. And I was leaving to go back to college, and my dad was taking me to the train station, and he said, "Oh, so by the way, I found some mushrooms, and I assume you gave them to your brother." And I was like, "Oh no." Thinking to myself, where is this gonna go? So I was like, thank goodness there's only about a 10-minute ride to the train station. Well, we got to the train station and it was late. It was delayed by 5 hours.
Oh.
So I had a 5-hour conversation about consciousness, really, and plant medicine. And my dad was very curious, and it was surprising. I was like, oh, this is great. He's actually curious. He's like, oh, I never tried them. What are they like? And we kept going because the train kept being not there. But what really broke me through to this mission that I'm on was on that train ride. I kind of must have drifted off a little bit, and maybe you or others in your audience have had an experience where you kind of waking back up, and I didn't quite have control of my body yet, but I became aware, almost like a waking dream, where I was sitting at a table And these voices were telling me everything that you've experienced through psychedelics is available to every human through the most basic human functions.
Hmm.
And as soon as I thought, what did it just say? It was like volume down, and I was back in the train. And I'm going,
Yeah.
what the heck was that? And so I'm a maps and models guy. I like to map things out and make models. So I started going, what are the most basic human functions?
Mm-hmm.
And came up with this little map that was like movement, breath. It was move, breathe, sound, rest, nourish, hydrate, with presence in the middle. So it was kind of like a little Star of David, and it was like presence. And I was like, okay, presence is the key, but it's through all of these basic human functions that somehow we can tap into this like super consciousness or multidimensional self. And I just started with gusto to learn and study and find teachers in everything I could surrounding movement and breath and sound and voice and nutrition and all these ways in which we could turn up what we're born with, the things
Mm-hmm.
that are already innate in our bodies. And it was like, okay, this innate wisdom, how can I better access it, govern it, and turn it up? And that really has been the thing I've been doing for the last 26 years.
Wow. That conversation went a long way.
It did. It's still at the, it's a cornerstone when something big happens, and it was like, it seemed like not that big, but
Yeah.
the opening that it created and the alignment in my life, it gave me something that it really inspired me in a way that I could help others. Because that was really
Amazing.
what was underneath it all, was like, I want to make a difference. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to just do the same old regurgitating stuff. And like watching people, I watched a lot of family members kind of like victims to their own stuff. And then whoever their doctors or healthcare practitioners were, it was like, don't they just want to do something about it themselves? Oh, I'm just waiting for the test. They're going to tell me what's wrong,
Yeah.
and what to do about it. And that to me just it rubbed me wrong, and it left me with this feeling of like, no, we can do better as human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. There are so many other things you can do to be able to support, which obviously you've identified. And so let's talk about, so obviously one of those pivotal moments was that conversation with your dad, right? That it just kind of opened the doors to the floodgates of where you were meant to go. And so kind of integrating movement, meditation, sound healing into that approach, tell me about how these contributed to just overall well-being and how you implemented those and learned about those throughout your journey.
Yeah, I think right out the gate, there was movement systems. I kind of became a yoga junkie, you could say, like doing a lot of it. Like, I was fortunate to be at university and have a lot of spare time. And I just started doing a lot of movement. So both in like yogic stuff, but also African dance and Latin dance, just kind of moving my body and figuring out what does that turn on inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, all the paths that I've gone down led me back to the brain and nervous system as this like overarching governance within ourselves, and started to look at, so like took massage and bodywork trainings, learned to teach that, did yoga, and then learned to teach that and train others. And just always the idea was like, you could say in order to master it, you have to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
And I really felt like that was the case with me, was like, learn it, apply it, make it my own, and then do whatever I needed to learn with the right teachers and schools and organizations so that I could then teach others. And what I found to be the biggest inhibitor across the board when people I worked with, whether it was students or then clients, was that something was out of balance and in their bodies. It was physically visible and measurable. Like, I'm like, okay, something's off here. There's excessive tension on one side, excessive weakness on another side. Typically people come in and they always have problems on one side. So I started to wonder what that was all about. And then the further you go in to the body, so the more central you work, the more effects it's going to have rippling out.
Yep.
And then over time realize, well, even the central, the way the body and nervous system work is from above down, inside out. So then it's like, well, go in as deep as we can, then go up as high as you can. And it ultimately leads to the brain. And that's where I find everything becomes more applicable when you have a framework of understanding the brain and nervous system. You start to look at movement differently, breath differently, sound or voice differently, nutrition differently, rest differently. Everything starts to have more clarity about, oh, wait a second, all the systems are downline of this. And if I can make systems at the highest level, then I can affect everything with the least output on my part.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and I think that people forget about how important these types of modalities are, or that they even exist, right? I feel like that's a big part of all this. And let's talk about some of, I feel like there's, from kind of reading and getting up to date on a few things, there's definitely a unique combination of practices that you use. Obviously, you've identified some of those kind of when you were looking for that map.
Yeah.
And so what I want to dig into, though, is there is experiences and practices that actually led you to discover solutions to your wife's health issues. And then we'll start there, but then subsequently help over 100 others with chronic diseases. Let's share on that. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I mean, just to quickly touch on what you said before, is like what most people overlook because it's just so simple, is that they're sitting in the Ferrari of planet Earth. I mean, this human body is extremely intelligent, and the wisdom in it is already capable of self-governing, self-repair, self-healing, self-regulating on so many levels. And when it comes down to that story with my ex-wife, we had just had our fourth child, and we were, pretty ecstatic about life and everything else. Of course, like any other relationship, there's its ups and downs and challenges and all that, and four kids, running our own businesses, and but we got into a car accident about 2 months after he was born, and someone's bike rack fell off the back of their car on Highway 80. We're going 75 miles an hour. It's a big, like, Thule rack, and it bounced off the highway and then came through our windshield.
Wow.
And it was a slow motion situation for me. I was driving, she was in the passenger seat, and it came through the window and stopped about 6 inches. The glass caved in and stopped about 6 inches from her chest, maybe a little less.
Wow.
And we were like, oh my gosh, we made it. I'm so grateful, just went straight to gratitude. Like, wow, we did it. Like, we didn't die, and I didn't swerve. It was like one of those things, like, don't swerve. I remembered this kid in high school that had swerved and died because he was trying to miss something. It all came to me in that instant.
Yeah.
And then so we pulled off the road, dealt with insurance stuff, everything else. But about 2 weeks later, she just thought she had the flu, and she couldn't get up. And so, but it just kept going. And after 2 more weeks, we're like, this isn't the flu. Like, what is going on? And, dozens of practitioners and specialists, nobody had any idea what was going on. 9 months later, over $85,000 out of pocket, trying to figure out what is going on, because you have 4 children and you have someone who's in bed and can barely move, and, just barely getting her out to go to these visits. We hit exhaustion, of course, but finally someone was like, hey, we should test for Lyme. We'd thought about that earlier, but no one thought it was that, so they wouldn't even give us the tests. So we did do the test and came back positive for that, and 3 co-infections and a fungus in her gut, like a deadly fungus at 83% mortality rate. So along the way, it was many times like, is this even we're gonna make it through this? And then looking at bringing together like a bunch of my teachers and mentors, just sort of like without even knowing. I didn't really talk about what was going on. I was just so in it. But they just kind of like in unison came out of the woodworks and helped me come up with a protocol that we could apply. And it was very multi-dimensional or multi-leveled, you could say, because we did work on that biology at like a very deep colloidal level, like changing the terrain, which has to do with, helping get the pH right, helping get the liver and gallbladder and pancreas functioning to get the bile and the enzymes all flowing, but simultaneously getting the brain to come out of the stress state and the constant protection survival mode that, she wasn't alone. 98% of people, whether you feel good and you think you're not stressed or not, your body is
Right.
lateralized into that limbic function and in a stress state. And then getting her to do some deep work within herself to find out, well, what is the thing that you actually love that inspires you the most? Like, if you go into your life, each of us has a particular calling, you could say, or highest value. I like to call it the telos, which is the Greek word for it,
Hmm.
which is where your mind ends. And it means that you're doing something, you're so fully present and engaged in it that you're so alive, you're inspired, and you feel fulfilled. You embrace the challenges and the support equally instead of like trying to get away from the difficult and towards the easy.
Right.
And for her, it came down to this moment where she'd always been a singer
Mm.
and wanted to act. And in high school, had got caught by the choir teacher or whatever, smoking a cigarette, and got kicked out for life. So no more singing. And when she found that, there was like this cathartic moment, and then she just started to sing more. And at home, and like literally the combined, working through those protocols physically, viscerally, and then looking at emotionally, psychologically, and then having her start to do what she had always loved, it woke something up. And then she actually went and auditioned for a lead role in a musical, and out of like 100 and something people got called back, and got the lead role. And we watched her life force and her life come back online in real time. I mean, it was like watching somebody
Wow.
like radiate again because something had been squelched. The part of her that was the most inspired and alive had been put to rest a long time
Yeah.
ago. And there's that, you've probably heard, but there's studies where they looked at, well, what are the commonalities between the people who go into the supposed spontaneous remission?
Hmm.
And it's always 93% correlation was made between the people who, when they got their diagnosis and prognosis, instead of like 6 months to live, most people just die within that 6 months. It's like, you're giving a prescription and you're just going to do it. The people who were like, 6 months, well, screw my job and screw that, I'm going to move to Mexico City and paint because that's what I always wanted to do.
Hmm.
Suddenly they're cancer free, right?
Yeah.
There's this incredible correlation between our symptoms become disease, but our symptoms are effects of a deeper misalignment. The cause is not the symptom. Like our disease is not the symptom, it's something deeper. And the feedback that life gives us through our body, through our relationships, through our mind and emotions, those are all brilliance that's supposed to help move us back into alignment with who we really are. And most people think those are the problem. And so they get the doctors and the practitioners and the therapists to try to get the symptoms to go away, but
Right.
never actually coming into that alignment with who they really are, which would transform it all.
Right. Wow. That's incredible. And there are so many stories like that too,
Yeah.
right? It's being able to feel that deep joy as well. And yeah, and open up that inspiration again.
Yeah. And growth, right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
I find that people who find what they love and they start to fill their lives with it, it's amazing because well, one, it's like their own sense of time and space expand
Yeah.
massively. And instead of being frustrated and hesitating and procrastinating about what's going on in their life, they jump all in. And it's amazing how just up-leveled and empowered someone can be when they just start to, sometimes it's small steps at first, but small steps many times will lead you to a life that you love. And the simple way to put it is that you look at your calendar and whatever you put into your day that is high priority action that you love, the more you're going to love your life. And if you don't put in your own priorities, someone else will fill your life with theirs for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. And so there is obviously, I mean, your journey, you did a deep dive into many things, including herbalism, right? You talked about meditation and yoga and, of course, wellness. How did these impact your personal growth and kind of shape the approach to healing that you have now?
Hugely. One of I feel like one of the biggest breakthroughs I saw was I always saw things as like, I noticed that a lot of us we want to change or we want others to change. And through my own process, I found specifically certain types of movement would open my body up and feel like I just tapped into inspiration. It was like, instead of thinking, it was like a floodgate opened, and it was like idea and creativity and inspiration. And that was really helpful. But so was utilizing certain types of breathing and certain types of voice work, which really allowed the release aspect. You could say it's like you have to release in order to repattern, which then ultimately revitalizes your life. And transformation, this idea of transformation, I always had thought of it as change. But to me, transformation is something that reveals you. It doesn't change you, it reveals you. And so most of the work that I feel like had the most profound impact on me was the stuff that cracked open all of the conditioning and the conforming and the psychosomatic armoring that I'd been putting on to kind of guard that real me and protect me from like, oh, is it safe to say what I really want to say? Or don't I have to kind of do this because this is what mom wants me to do? And maybe I shouldn't say that because what are they going to think? Or what are they going to do? Or, avoiding conflict, accommodating others, getting all the things that I know I was doing to kind of make it. We have our survival mechanisms and patterns on what we do to get through. But it was the breath work and the voice work along with movement work that really like tuned my system up and then allowed me to build the energy inside of myself enough to like kind of crack off the extra. And I remember one of my teachers, a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, he always said, Buddha said, nothing extra. And it's like so simple. Nothing extra. Like you're it, nothing extra. And that kind of stuff, working with breath, especially the kind of breath where you really powerfully breathe and breathe and breathe for continuous time, a minimum 60 minutes. And sometimes there's sound, and sometimes there's movement, but to fill you up with so much life force, because breath is this engagement with the forces of life, and to flood those into your system until they literally like surface the stuff that you've been holding on to. And oftentimes there's release. That could be emotions, it could be sobbing, it could be crying, it could be revelations. But those experiences really made it clear to me that there was no choice for me other than to be me and to stay curious enough to just keep like, it's never, yes, we're all whole, complete, and balanced as we are. Like there's this beauty that's innate to us all, but there's also and continuous learning. Like I want a lifelong learning thing where it's like I'm continuously curious and still finding new teachers and teachings and seeing how I can integrate them in and see what kind of effect and impact they can have on me and then share them with others.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, and you always have to kind of go through that to find those things on your own so that you can obviously teach and get to that next level as well, and a deeper level as well. Yeah. And so your project, the Vitalist Project, can you kind of walk through just the inspiration behind that, what that actually means, what happens with regards to the lifestyle changes and things like that?
I love that question because Vitalist, it's like each of us is potentially a vitalist, and vitalism was an entire philosophy that kind of just got snuffed out by modern medicine. So 1913, a big study was funded by the Rockefellers and Rothschilds and JP Morgan called the Flexner Report. And that was kind of like, hey, now we know what real medicine is. You're a bag of chemicals, and chemicals dictate basically whether you're healthy or not. So chemical pharmaceutical medicine is the only medicine. And this idea that was previously standing vitalism is bunk. It was because that vitalism said that there's forces of life. There is life force that we're all tapped into, and that it's moving through us, and that we can work with those life forces to increase the access to our potentiality, and on the other side, increase our own healing capacity. So if something is wrong, that it's something to do with a disconnect between us and our source, us and the vital forces that are moving throughout the universe that are transmitted in presence through us all and through all of life. And there's kind of a balance between the forces that are coming in from the cosmos and the forces that are being transmitted and radiated out from the earth. And we're in the middle of that. Like we're dancing in these forces, and it's really about how to open ourselves up to them and let them move through us more. And then in the middle of that is our personality matrix, or our nervous system development, like what it is we've tended to like, what it is we've perceived to be missing, lacking, or void, or even violating. And that shapes us into what fulfills us as we express ourselves. So if something was missing when we were little, we perceived it to be missing, even if it wasn't, there's a tendency for us to impulsively, naturally want to create that in our lives. And that's a key to our own health. So the Vitalist Project is, turns out that most of the teachings I really attracted into my life and found and learned about are in some way about vitalism. And that in response to what I saw missing in life, which was people taking their health in their own hands and doing something about it, this project was born. And it was about first, like, bringing these teachings together into an accessible format and platform, and then kind of working towards archiving them so that they can be accessible by anyone and applied. And then the goal is to actually help people find out how to learn about these, apply themselves, and get feedback so they can find out, well, what works for me? Instead of like waiting, the next study came out on this university, on these 200 random people.
Yeah.
We're all so unique, like a snowflake, that it's really important to start to apply ourselves and find out what works for us and gives us the results, and then keep doing that.
Yeah, I agree. And what about, so obviously this method, is this been always kind of something that you've done in like workshops in person, more or less?
Yeah, I have online trainings and in-person stuff. So for a long time, I did yoga teacher trainings for folks. I did breathwork teacher trainings. I did all these stuff to become facilitators or teachers, and I still do that. And there's, I think, one sort of hands-on approach that I've been doing for almost 20 years. It's called the alignment process, but it's a way. It was like born out of chiropractic almost 100 years ago. So in the 1920s, there was this guy, Virgil Crane, and he was auditing every chiropractor west of the Mississippi over 5 years. And he found that the average adjustment lasted no more than 90 steps from the table. And he thought,
wow,
they had a vitalistic philosophy. So they had this idea that the power that makes the body heals the body, that all we could do for another person is to help them get into more favorable circumstances to heal themselves. And those were sound. He felt like that was really good, deep stuff, but why isn't this working? So he had a hunch that it was about a higher level of control in the body, and that by manipulating vertebra, it would go right back out because something in the body was saying, hey, I put that there. What are you doing? And so he had a hunch that it had to do with the brain. He ended up meeting Paramahansa Yogananda on his path, and he said, that's the mouth of God you're working on, because he kept coming up here to the occiput and saying, this is where I think I'm supposed to work. And so over 19 years into the 40s, he developed this style, and then EEG equipment came out in the late 40s, early 50s. And he found out that he had developed a 12 adjustment thing with a final movement into the occiput. And he found out that the 12 adjustments didn't do anything really to the brain. And then this final one changed everything. It was like a reboot switch. So if you have a computer, right, and it's bogged down and it's not functioning very well, and we've all had the little rainbow wheel of death come up, and like, oh gosh, here we go. What do? You boot it, right? You restart the computer. So he figured out that there was these main nerve ganglions in the back of the head for the sympathetic part of the nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is kind of split in two. You have sympathetic, which is like active, reactive, go, thinking, processing, daytime stuff. And then you have parasympathetic, which is supposed to full swing at night, where we heal and rest and digest and grow and repair. And it turned out that most people, even back then, were chronically in one hemisphere limbic system. So that sympathetic part of the brain was turned on and locked in, trying to survive and protect ourselves all the time. So they started to develop a philosophy around that was like, okay, old part of the brain working, this primitive part of the brain is designed to survive. So like predator-prey games, something about modern life is triggering it into response and then not turning off. So where the normal tiger or bear you meet while you're gathering berries in the woods, in 20 minutes, you know whether you made it or not. And when you make it, the brain goes, bear's gone. Downregulates out of that stress state, brainwaves slow down, activity moves back to the neocortex and the prefrontal cortex. This is where we want our blood flow, oxygen, and glucose to go, because that's that human level of function where we can see ourselves and our lives and others more objectively, and therefore stop playing these polarity games, polarizing against or for, and instead starting to see more brilliance in everything. And so he figured out a way to hit the reboot switch. And what's crazy is our modern studies have shown that in 0.4 seconds, the brain gets the signal, scans the body, scans the environment, and goes, oh, there's no tiger, resets and turns on. Brain slows down into alpha, theta, and delta waves. We get activity in both hemispheres rather than just lateralized. And that's where we're supposed to be, is in this space of neutral, ready to respond or rest. But not just already chronically in a response, because when we're in that response, that's when our brains cut off most of the energy to our digestion, to our immune system, to our tissue repair, our cell function and replication. So you can see how stress is actually at the root of our dis-ease, because the longer we're in a stress state, the more toxins accumulate, processes back up and waiting on the back burner. Our body is waiting for the energy from the brain, while the brain's saying, well, none of that matters if I don't beat the bear, right? So I got to prioritize survival. And that's why, there's a lot of studies that come out that show that over 90% of all disease is stress related, because our bodies would normally heal itself, but it's being stuck in this stress response to modern stress, which has many beginnings and no clear ending. Unlike the simple stress of our hunter-gatherer past, clear beginning, clear ending, we're well adapted to that, not well adapted to modern stress. So almost all the things, like you mentioned, like the movement that I do is about crossing the midline. And in doing crossing the midline, we're getting the two hemispheres to talk. The type of breathing is specific breathing to downregulate the brain out of a stress state, to start kicking in the parasympathetic. Using voice, like simple things like what babies do if you have kids, like just making sound. Or when you're stressed out, you go, and you do that a few times, and it's like, wow, I feel better. It's so many really simple things that we can do that are built in that'll help bring the brain out of that chronic stress and start to catch up on the repair that we need to do.
Well, and I discovered sound therapy probably about, I would say 25 years ago. And I found that to be just so energizing to me, right? It just brought more energy into the body for me, my experience. And again, just one part of it. And so you've obviously had some challenges as well. And, talking about challenges, health decline, end of a long-term relationship, and really shaping your understanding of self-care and the necessity and balance of life. And how did all those affect you to even kind of bring you to the next level of, I feel like, what you're already doing?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's a tough one to answer, but that the way I found out what I found out about my personality is like going back, 20 to 25 years ago, I just did like an extensive amount of work in that, what I would say the transformation, like revealing myself. And then got into a relationship pretty young, had kids in my mid 20s and have 4 kids. And one thing I found out about myself is I'm incredibly loyal. So even at the cost of what feels right for me. And so just sort of putting myself last. And there's a lot of wisdom in doing that in leadership. Like there's leaders eat last, like this idea that we really are here to care for others. And there's this piece of us that really needs to understand that there's also like the sphere of concern that we want to concern ourselves over and make a difference with. So if it's just with my family, or if it's with a community, or if it's with a certain population worldwide or an organization, that there's an amount of self-care that is required each level up that you go. So if you expand your sphere of concern, you actually need to concern yourself with your inner work even more. And so the more I had kids, the more I had businesses, the more I had clients, my wife's health decline, it all really, like, I was just robbing myself, like emptying my reservoir to be able to show up and continue to keep it all together. And that was, to the end where my body, and by the time she was well and thriving, it's like my body, I started to have rash from, my arms and legs. I couldn't figure out. No one could figure it out. And I'm like, tried all my normal tricks and everything else. And this was the time in which it finally, like that full psychosomatic piece fully kicked in for me. Like I had witnessed it in her, but since I was doing what I loved, I was like, well, that's not me. But there was so many ways in which I was limiting myself and inhibiting myself from the kind of, like, I would get invitations to go teach or speak all over, and I'd say no, even though my inside was saying yes. But because of the kids and because of her health, it was just a continuous, like, oh, can't do that. No. And so I was not listening to what life was calling me to do. And until I had a friend who checked in my brain. He's like, bro, I don't know how to tell you this, but you're gonna have a stroke if you don't stop.
Wow.
Whatever it is you're doing. He's like, I've never seen brain activity like this. He's like, you have one of the most powerful brains I've ever seen, but this is not good. He said, you need to stop right now and leave for at least a week. And so that was like, we got off the equipment, looked at, okay, went home to my wife and said, I have to leave. I don't know what this means, but I just have to go. And so I went to a little cabin in the woods at the hot springs and just did nothing but sleep, walk, soak, and eat and hydrate for a week. I did some movement and stuff. But when I came back, it was, that was when my wife was like, hey, we're breaking up. And I was just like, what? No, we're not. It went through a lot of like, there's no way. But she had her moment of like, whoa, like this whole situation is like gone way out of hand, and you've given so much. And our relationship had gone from, a great relationship to one in which I was just the caregiver and, the provider. And she's like, I'm not in love with you. I have no spark, there's no intimacy, like sexuality, like I have none of that. Like I just feel like I'm just pitying you, if anything. So I think some people out there can resonate with that. Like we go down and then we stay in it. And it was really hard because it was like I was the first person in my whole family to even go through a divorce. Like everyone's like so loyal and stuck in it. It was like, am I really doing this? And it unlocked something so profound, and so difficult. Like teaching taught me so much, and my kids' experience going through that taught me so much. But I am definitely way more aligned and alive than I have been for a long time. And I'm able to share these stories that are real. Like I almost felt like my life was just too good, and I didn't really have any stories of my own. So it was always like my clients' stories. They went through this. And then to have something, it's like, oh, no, I definitely went through something. I was just kind of overriding it because I had all the tools. But something deeper I like to say that our souls are willing to take us to the grave in order to get us to wake up to be who we really are and do what we really need to do.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite an empowering story. And so with regards to, transformations, obviously you've got some collaborative efforts with Swirl Life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what are some of the synergies? Like, let's talk about those, the two organizations and just the partnership and how that affect. I mean, there's obviously, hundreds of thousands of people around the world that can be affected by what you do. And so what do you see there with regards to that partnership?
Yeah, well, so Swirl is a friend of mine. She had been a colleague, and I'd seen her at trainings. She'd been to every one of my trainings, and even had assisted me a few times. And because I was just in a relationship and, committed, I didn't ever look at her in a certain way. And so after the divorce, she came to one of the trainings I was running, and she is always like my scribe at this certain training. So she's taken it before. She's like, I don't really need to take it again, but I just love being around it and helping.
Yeah.
And I just like saw her in a new light. And I was like, holy crap, this person knows me completely. Like, we already had this long friendship of 7 or 8 years. And wow, actually, I'm so attracted. I just had never let myself feel that before, but just saw that. And it quickly aligned in our work because there's so much of like the limits to my own growth had to do with certain aspects of administrative duties and other things that she was actually really good at. And so we partnered up, and I mean, now we're married. We're just living this aligned life. We travel and teach and see clients and still, take care of the kids and do all of that. But since my relationship with her, so I hold the lineage for this type of movement called EDGU, EDGU, and it's not an acronym. It's more like the edge of you. So remember how I said that first I learned that you had to go to the center, like the very core. And so this movement style crosses the midline, and it's a self-reflective moving meditation and spinal maintenance, brain maintenance movement system. There's really nothing like it. And my teacher, after I'd done it for about 15 years, he said, hey, I want to pass this torch on to you, and you can just carry it forward. And I did, but she was also very into this movement system. And so since we came together, it was like, now it's really starting to grow. We started offering online trainings of it, and we still do in-person trainings for both like practitioner training and then teacher trainings. And then there's this work with the autonomic nervous system, the reset. It's called Alphabiotics. And that had been in one family since that guy Virgil Crane in the 1920s. So 3 generations. The third generation, I learned from the second generation and third. And the third generation, he's in his 70s now. And they asked me to teach it in 2012. And over 4 years, I mentored and shadowed with them until I launched a satellite program out in California. And they're out of Dallas. So Swirl really came in and helped me look at these, what we're doing and what we're offering. And in the last couple of years, we've now taken over the entire academy for Alphabiotics as well. So for us, it's like a marriage of systems where you can help others hands-on to reset their nervous systems and bring them into a greater state of balance and life expression, and then teach them a maintenance system, a movement and meditative, self-reflective system that they can use to increase their life force and build the tissue to support that amount of life force moving through you, and have a tool that gives you a way to navigate your life, because it's like all these powerful teachings are kind of in the subtext of the story that we tell when we teach it.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And it's amazing when everything aligns. And as you're speaking about that, I'm like, I always feel like that just meant to be.
Yeah.
Right? That's amazing. What a great story.
It was cool too. She said, she said that when she left my office the first time with her partner at the time, she looked at him and said, that's my guy. And he was like, what? She's like, well, I mean, as a teacher, like, I just want to learn everything he has to offer. But she's like, but deep down, I was like, maybe he is my guy, but maybe not this lifetime, because look at, he's married and he's all this. And so she's like, I would never cross that line. And so I think that there was this powerful, union, and we all have contracts with one another that give us great teachings. And I love my ex-wife and everything that we created together. And it's wouldn't change it for the world.
Yeah.
And it also, led me to this
Absolutely. Yeah.
next level of expression. And yeah, so we're seeing big growth in this, and because we see that what we want to do is give people keys to their vitality. Like, hey, you already got
Love
them.
it.
Love to see you use them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so everybody, there are so many different resources. So you can find Vitalist Life on social media, on Facebook, Instagram. We'll have those in our description, of course, along with some other media samples too, which are kind of fun. And then there's a couple of special giveaways.
Yeah. So I'd love to give everyone who's listening a chance to do a workshop with me. So it's online, it's
Amazing.
recorded, and it's going to introduce you to your brain and your nervous system in a way you may not have ever thought about it before, and then help you understand how you can start to move your body in a way that can trigger a beautiful response regularly. So I call it neurohacking for stress. It's a 75-minute workshop with a lot of experiential stuff at the end. And you can find that for free at haveahappyspine.com.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think there's also a PDF booklet that goes with that too. So that's
Yeah.
great.
There-
Excellent. So hopefully you guys take advantage of the workshop. Again, we'll have that link in the description as well, and be able to dig to that next level for yourself.
Yeah, and that PDF is actually about finding that telos I mentioned.
Nice.
So it's going to be like a talk about your brain, nervous system, and perception,
Mm-hmm.
and then a series of questions you ask yourself, and you have to get really honest with yourself about the answers, and it will reveal to you this sort of life alignment, or your telos, the place that is most inspiring and fulfilling for you. And then you can take those small steps and start to put more and more of that part that you love about life into your daily life.
That's amazing. So amazing. So I hope for those listening and watching, you take advantage of that. I think you would be crazy not to with what you can get out of it. So Jeffrey, thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your journey and just everything you've discovered along the way and your story.
Lisa, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. And so for those of you watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to my channel. There's a brand new episode every 2 weeks. Give this episode a thumbs up. And for those of you listening on your favorite podcast host, make sure you give this episode a like, and we will see you next time. Thanks for joining us today on the Human Optimization Podcast. Episode technical production is by Grace Sylvester and guest booking by Stu Tate. Want to learn more? Visit LisaPitel-Killah.com for incredible free resources to supercharge your journey to becoming the best version of you. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe to the Human Optimization Podcast and follow me on social media at Lisa Pitel-Killah.